Beep beep. What is up, ninjas? My name is Sam World and I make music production and sound design videos for dance music here on YouTube. Now, the moment that you buy Ableton, you get access to an amazing DAW and really cool effects that I believe stand up to some of the best third-party plugins out there. And I've always had this sort of belief that if you were to purchase a third-party plugin, it should be because it does something that your stock effects don't already do. Now in today's video, I wanted to go over the effects that I use the most that come with Ableton. Now there's a reason why I would use them over the third-party counterparts, and the first reason is the fact that they are just more CPU friendly. They're optimized to run inside of Ableton. They don't have fancy graphics, and it's a lot easier to put a bunch of them and not make the CPU go mad. And finally, some of the Ableton effects are very simple to use, and I always recommend people learn on them before they move on to the third-party plugin counterpart, where things can get a little too complicated and you can start developing choice paralysis, not knowing what to move and are you doing too much, etc. With that being said, guys, if you want to support the channel, make sure to head over to evilsounds.com where you can find all of my sound design work. And let's get into the plugins inside of Ableton that I use the most. The echo found inside of Ableton Live is the most used stock effect that I utilize in my productions, and it's probably the effect that's saving me the most CPU power. Anything delay or reverby will eat CPU right up, so that's one of the reasons why I like to use it a lot. Now, the third-party counterpart that I use instead of the Ableton Echo is going to be the Echo Boy from Soundtoys. And the only reason I might choose to use the Echo Boy is, one, I don't know what I want, what kind of echo I need, so I'll start going through the patches which sound a lot better, and of course, there's a lot of variety to pick from. From there, we're also going to have different sort of styles, which different sound engines for different sort of delays, which sound is good. So again, that's one thing that the Echo Boy offers that the Ableton Echo doesn't. However, if I want a standard echo or something even complex and I know what I want, then it's very easy to dial it into the echo. So for instance, here I have this beautiful art melody, which sounds a little boring by itself. Okay, so if I wanted to, I could dial in a standard ping pong delay. I can also EQ the delay with the filter section here. And if I want the delay itself to sound a little bit more like ambient-y, then we can add a bit of reverb. We can also get more complex with the echo. We can add modulations to it. For instance, one of the easiest ones to do that won't mess it up is changing the filter. So we can add maybe a rate of 1, let's say, and let's go with a triangle based modulation. Let's move the phase maybe a tad bit just to kind of have it like so. And then from there, let's do some crazy kind of peaks on it, add a bit of resonance to one of them so that we can actually hear it moving to the left and right. And let's lower down the reverb. And you can see how the delay just becomes a lot more dynamicful and has a lot of movement, which for some tracks, this might make sense. The other thing too is that we can do a lot more cool stuff. For instance, we can kind of set this to time, and we can use the echo more as a sound design tool for the delay and making it sound maybe a little bit more lush, etc. For instance, we can set this up. Let's have it at 50. From there, we can activate a wobble in the character section. Can create this kind of very eerie lo-fi effect if programmed right. But yeah, the echo is really good, and it's going to be my top choice for, again, creating echoes, maybe simple, complex, or just to add a bit of like character to a sound. The utility effect found in Ableton Live is probably one of the most underrated effects, but it's going to be one of the most used ones for me for a few reasons. Now, while it only has a couple of knobs, it can become very useful for certain things. If you've ever found yourself wanting to automate the level of something inside of Ableton, and let's say you go to the master output of whatever instrument you have it on and you do something like this, you know it can be a pain in the butt to level this. You'll try to level over here and now you messed your automation up, so then you reset. And then from there, you're like, oh, okay, I have to go like this, and this can become a pain in the butt. So in order to counter this and keep your mix intact and just make your life a lot easier, we can utilize the gain instead to automate certain things. Like for instance here, 5 dB, and then it gets louder, but again, the mix is not gonna suffer. You're gonna be able to level still, and it makes life a lot easier. Very useful for when you wanna make instruments quieter in certain B sections, breaks, verses, and then make them sound loud in the chorus. And again, you still maintain your normal volume. The other cool thing about it is the width feature, which you can use to create more dynamic full arrangements. For instance, in the intro of a song, artistically, you might decide, hey, I want no width. And then when you get finally into, let's say, a verse, then we can easily okay, so we can do that, and we can even widen stuff up more. If that's something that you desire in doing. From there, the mono feature is really useful for hearing your track in mono or making sounds be mono. You can probably see the piano's not popping out enough, so there might be a decision I might make in the mix, maybe accentuating more of the mids on the piano so that you can hear it in a mono system. From there, we also have the bass mono feature. Well, I feel like most producers already know that everything below a certain frequency should be in mono. Some people still don't believe that, but let's assume you forget that and in the master you decide to fix it, then you can utilize this. We can mono this portion. Not mono. And then from there, we can also pretty much invert the phase of the track or set instrument. Now, I do recommend you guys watch a video on how this can become useful for you in a production setting, but for me, I rarely use this. The last thing I'll say is if I'm going to collapse a sound into mono, let's assume, for instance, the piano that we've recorded here, I would want it to be more monophonic. Then what I could do is go into Ableton, set up a utility, collapse it to the left or right channel instead. Instead of collapsing both the left and right, which can sometimes sound really eek and nasty if the sample that you're using has a bit of the Haas effect in it. The Ableton Saturator is going to be the next stock effect that I use the most, and for good reason. When you're looking to beef stuff up, you cannot go wrong with saturating it instead of EQing. Now, usually with the Saturator, it's very simple to use, but you can also use it in a complex format where you start to wave shape and you start to mess with these settings over here. But majority of the time, I find producers will use it for some of the more simpler curves, and then from there increase the drive. So for instance, here we're going to have these drums hitting around 60 dB. So we're going to add a bit of drive. And then from there we can compare. And notice how the hat just gets this nice little lift. We're almost at the same volume here. We can maybe output it a little less. And notice that change that the hat gets. While it's very subtle, usually saturation is just that. It's going to be something that you can either overdo to create distortion or just add a bit more excitement into the track. Now, again, there's other cool features. For instance, if you want to, focus the saturation on a specific frequency, we can set it here, increase the depth, which is going to determine, again, how much this is going to affect. And then from there, we can increase the width of the bell. which doesn't sound as good, but it's going to be there if you use it slightly. For instance, to target the open hat more. So you can do a lot of really cool stuff with this. And again, the Ableton Saturator is great for beefing stuff up. One thing I tell all my students is to try to put it on every channel in the song and slightly just push it. If you do it just like that, you don't do that much harm, and you do get your track sounding just a little bit more fuller. The glue compressor is my next most used Ableton stock effect, and it's going to be the first effect on this list, which is in collaboration with a third-party company known as Saturator, who are known for their amazing third-party plugin called the Glue. Now, the Glue is going to be modeled after a classic 80s British console, which I believe is an SSL. They just couldn't say. And it's going to look like this. And in all honesty, the Ableton one's exactly the same. It doesn't look as pretty, but all the same knob settings are going to be there. Now, usually I use this on the bus of stuff. So for instance, here I have a main leads bus, which has all my synths. We have an ARP. A very lush lead. And then later on in the song, we get this very driven. So what we can do with the glue is we can utilize it to glue essentially the sounds together, and it does it in a very dynamical way, of course. But usually what I like to tell people the glue is doing is just a bit of volume automation. Depending on what instrument is the loudest, it's going to drive it, and then it's going to kind of control the peaks, in essence creating more of a glued feel. So for instance, here we're going to have the main ARP. From there, we can give it a bit of attack and release. Now, another thing I like about this thing is that some of the settings are predetermined, so you don't really have to be like, should I go with 3.1 or 3.2? You're going to have, again, just a couple to choose from, and I really like that. For instance, maybe I'll go with something like a 3 milliseconds, and then for the release, if I don't know what I want, I will just set it to auto, and then from there, ratio 4 or 2. People say that 2 is usually better for gluing stuff, and then if you have a heavy hand, you can add a range. That way, if I decide to pull the threshold back, it doesn't go all the way to -20 gain reduction. I can, again, control my heavy hand. I'm going to make it up. Now let's do it over here. Notice that when I have it on, a lot of the synths come to the front and they're just, well, I guess a bit more glued, but that's a weird way of saying it, ain't it? It's more of like composure. Most of the sounds sound like they're equally in the same volume range. So you can definitely see when I turn it off and on that the main lead sound, this guy here, kind of sounds a little bit more now in the mix. It doesn't sound like it's in the back. It gets a little louder. Again, the dun dun kind of pops out. Everything feels a little bit more glued and it just fits in the mix rather than without it on, sounding kind of dull. The Convolution Reverb found in Ableton Live Suite is going to be my last most overused stock effect that you can find inside of Ableton. Now, with this one, you do need the suite in order to reach it, and I think the echo you did as well. Now, I do know that the Convolution is made in collaboration with another third-party company, I believe, but again, it doesn't state it like the Glue Compressor did. Now, the reason I love the convolution so much is, one, it's a different kind of reverb that you can't find in the standard audio effect reverb, and it's going to work based on modeled, essentially, reverb spaces. And in all honesty, the more I use this thing is on drums for adding reverb to my drums. For instance, here in this track, we have a gated snare. That we can use by going into the made for drums and then picking the snare chamber, and then from there snare plate. Which I really like, and it just sounds good. And then from there I can also EQ. From there, it also has some really cool kind of spaces to use for the reverb for your drums. So for instance, here I can go maybe BM7 percussion, make sure it's at 100% wet, this one as well. And then from there, we can maybe route some of our drums into it here, the drum bus. Again, we're going to EQ the low end out as best as we can. Can mess with the decay and whatnot, but it's just really cool, and it's sort of a different sort of reverb that you can utilize for your tracks. And I really like this thing. Like I said, I usually find myself using it more on drums, but I'm sure there's other applicable parts like creating pads, putting it on stuff, making techno rumble kicks, etc. Alright guys, so these are going to be my 5 most used Ableton stock effects. Like I stated, I love the fact that they're very simple to use. They're very CPU friendly. Now, I'm sure you guys have your favorite effects, so if you want to let me know down in the comments below what's your favorite Ableton effect, I'd love to read your comments to see what you guys are using. As always, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit like. My camera decided to overheat, so that's why I'm not showing my beautiful face, just showing the beautiful plugins. But other than that, you guys have a great rest of your day, and much love.